Welcome back, everybody. This is Night Flight. I'm Judith Koba, and my very special guest today is Gary Wayne. Gary Wayne is the author of this book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. And even if you're not religious, you find yourself you're interested in secret societies, who is who, and how deep the roots go, and so on and so forth. This is the book for you. So, Gary, welcome back to Night Flight.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and very much looking forward to the discussion today. I know many of the audience that follows me, they enjoy the interviews that you do with me, and so they always look forward to hearing another one with you.
Yeah. So, Gary, I think for those listeners who didn't listen to our very first interview where we talked about the guardians of the Antichrist, please elaborate a little bit. What are we talking about when we talk about bloodline families?
Yeah, and the terms are kind of intertwined in terms of the guardians and the bloodlines. So within the bloodlines, those are the bloodlines that go back to the giants, both before, and they'll even claim, after the flood and before the flood, they'll claim both. And so within their royal bloodlines, and they all have genealogies that they say that they have documented to trace that back. The purer the genealogy and the more scion grafted in bloodlines of other lines of fallen angels and Nephilim branches ennobles that bloodline and creates a more renowned bloodline that is higher up in the hierarchy. So the purer the bloodlines and the more it's ennobled is your positioning in that hierarchy of the cults. And so within that ideology of what the Rosicrucians call the Vril, something in the blood that goes back to the giants, they believe that they have the divine right to rule. Just as the Stuart kings were the most prominent to proclaim that in sort of the more modern period. But before that, they were in ancient times described and understood as the divine representatives of the gods. And intermediary between the gods and the humans and carrying out the will as a messenger of the gods. So the divine right to rule, and thus the importance of the bloodlines. So as you were sort of roll that whole ideology forward, that if there's going to be a Messiah, then they're going to have their own Messiah, their own dragon Messiah that we would know in Christianity as Antichrist, the false Messiah, the Messiah of the bloodlines of the Nephilim. And that's what they believe, and that they will want to present their Antichrist in the end time. That's going to be the king of the world. The king of Jerusalem is part of that whole ideology that they believe in, that they've inherited through these various scioning of these bloodlines. That will be at the abomination when he's crowned the king of Jerusalem, noting that King Felipe of Spain and his father Juan Carlos has the current king of Jerusalem title, and the Habsburg-Lorraine dynasty before that, and all the way back to when it was first inducted with Baldwin II in 1118 in a small priory on a rock in Zion or in Jerusalem, was the first, I guess, Western European claim to that crown, and it's come down all the way. And within that whole ideology of the Templars and the bloodlines and how they intermix is that they've been guarding the secret message of the Templars, which is the bloodlines of the Merovingian dynasty that goes back to giants, and the Scion ones that they also say go back to Judea, which includes King David, King Saul, and allegedly and falsely, in my opinion, and my conclusion, back to Jesus and Mary Magdalene through the son Josephus that marries into the Merovingian dynasty with Aragon and Amenemhat of the Merovingians, and Aragon of the Celtic dynasties, because Joseph of Arimathea is said to have taken Josephus to Glastonbury, and then he intermarries into the Pendragon dynasties of the Celtic dynasties. So they have a plan and they have a timetable to present their Antichrist. And they would like to present it at a different time than the ordained times. And so the bloodlines that would produce the Antichrist and the protection of those families and those antichrists is transgenerational, so that it's not going to be interrupted and prevent them, let's say, from one of the orders of the Catholic Church or something, wanting to take them out. And so those are the guardians, and they guard the genealogies, they guard the chosen ones, because these ones are initiated from childhood, and they are sort of the most ennobled and the most brightest and likely firstborn of each of those types of generations, and they need to be protected. And according to their writings, they're not going to be limited to one. They've got 3 on the go all of the time. And of course, there's several different bloodlines, so you're going to have some competing bloodlines, right? There's different families. I'm sure, the Windsor family would like, say William to be one of the ones that might want to be their Antichrist figure, or I'm sure the Bourbon family of Spain would have their claim to it, and so on and so forth, with all of the different royal bloodlines. And so they keep 3 of these, and when they do announce it, though, at least according to some of the families, they want to announce this Antichrist first in the town of Geezers, which was where the cutting of the elms took place, and the Priory of Sion split away from the Knights Templar, and who later form, as a new Red Cross Society, the Rosicrucians, who become sort of the succession to the Templars after their fall in 1307. This cutting of elms is 1188. So they want him in the main part of the center, and the main archway, called the Grand Monarch, is where they want the Grand Monarch to make his first introduction. It may be fairly low key at that point in time, but important occult sort of prediction, where they want to introduce them to their royal families, and then he will try and ascend to be Antichrist. Now, there's going to be many Antichrists, and we know that Jesus uses the word Antichrist in plural for the end time. So there's going to be many competing ones, and more than just the European ones. There'll be worldwide Antichrist, whether it's the Mahdi from the Shia out of Islam, or Maitreya or the new Buddha out of Hinduism, and on and on and on around the world, because you have these bloodlines all around the world, and they're all going to be sort of competing for this Antichrist type figure. And it's also interesting to note that Gog of the Gog-Magog war of the last times in Ezekiel 37, and it says in the latter times, so this is a different war than Revelation 20. And in Ezekiel 39, it's the time of the second Exodus, which again happens in the last 3.5 years. So it's an end time prophecy. Gog, as you take that back, is not only a giant as the offspring of Iapetus and or Poseidon, depending on which line of Greek mythology you want to go down there. And I kind of think they're kind of been conflated. But Gog, Magog, and Albion. Albion is a giant more associated with Normandy and England in terms of its relationship to Gog and Magog. They're offspring of Nephilim, and Gog in the New Testament goes back, in its meaning, not only as a reference to sons of Japheth being named after those giants as they moved into Turkey, but also being, and this is very, very interesting, an allegory for an Antichrist figure. So you will probably have some Antichrist figures that are trying to do some counterfeit Armageddons, and the one who takes credit for that counterfeit war will actually be the true Antichrist, but Gog is defeated, right? So the Antichrist is actually going to use another Antichrist figure to elevate his pedigree before Jesus comes and claim that as Armageddon. And that's the Joel 1 and 2 war, and that's the Revelation 9 war after Azazel, Abaddon, Apollyon come out of the abyss. And it's the 200 million man war that's listed there. So anyways, I know a long answer to who the guardians are, but you need to understand it in context of what they believe and what they want to do with that belief.
Okay, So, as you said, we will see several figures that are competing for the position of Antichrist.
Yes.
So, how are they going to make the decision? Who gets the final go? And will we see a time where that is very confusing and
Yep.
everybody will rack their
I
brains? What's going on here?
I think so. I think
Mhm.
as you see these factions rise, it's like I don't know whether you're familiar with a television show that was out of the 80s and 90s, and some movies called The Highlander, where there
Yes.
can only be one. I
Yeah.
think they're going to have something on a more, let's say, geopolitical scale that's going to sort that out. That's why you're going to have some wars in the end time that is going to help sort that out.
Ah, okay.
And as all of the different religions and cultures have an end time scenario, they all have an antichrist figure that's going to lead their people.
Mm.
So I think there's going to be some turmoil as we go through, and people are going to be very quick to point to this individual and that individual as antichrist. And it's just going to take away from the credibility of that as being it, except for the one that the true Antichrist wants to use as the one that he defeats to create his own
Mm.
Armageddon type pedigree and put on his resume, because everything he needs to do, he needs to counterfeit what is promised for the return of Jesus. And that's why Jesus tells us not to be concerned when you hear about his coming, that he's here or he's
Mm.
there, because
Mm.
there's going to be this going on all over the place as you get into the end times. So we need to be very, very careful. And over in North America, they point to every president that comes up as an antichrist figure. And it's like, no, all you're doing is creating a scenario that people just won't believe a word you're saying, right? You
Yeah.
can't make these, you have to be very, very careful. And
Mm.
even when we do recognize him as negotiating this covenant that brings about the last 7 years, and he is sponsored at least afterwards by the Universal Church, but I think maybe before, to create the covenant, then he still is an antichrist yet.
Mm.
So he'll be rising to antichrist. So you'll have all of these other competing antichrists, even though he's done the covenant deal. He won't appear that he is until as you get closer to the midpoint of the last 7 years, the 3.5 year point, because that's when he's crowned. And that's just after uh, the Revelation 9 war, Joel 1 and 2, Ezekiel 38 and 39, all the same war. And that's why Luke talks about when you see him with his armies surrounding Jerusalem, after an overwhelming army, as Daniel talks about, is swept away before him, he takes credit for that, moves into Jerusalem, and that's the abomination. And that's when the Judeans will recognize him as Antichrist. Even though the covenant has permitted them to do the sacrifice on a wing of the temple for the first 3.5 years, they will flee to the wilderness to be protected by God again. So again, just because he negotiates the covenant, we have to be careful that every type of peace deal that they're talking about in the Middle East isn't antichrist. They're putting
Mhm.
pieces
Yeah.
together because antichrist just sort of assumes power after the whole table is set for him. He's unlike a antichrist figure, let's say like a Hitler or like a Napoleon or a Nebuchadnezzar, where they're trying to take over the world with war.
Mhm.
It's already laid out for him to assume based on the organizational structure and the war that happens before that allows him to counterfeit Jesus's coming at Armageddon.
Yeah. So, a couple of weeks ago, I had an interview with Mark Devlin, and he is very famous for pointing out that all the movie stars, the athletes, and the singers and bands and what have you in entertainment, that there is something else going on, not what we believe at all. So, because you will find that either one or two parents have connections to the alphabet agencies, or they are in the military, or sometimes they have these um, a bloodline to, they are related to Bushes and other presidents or royals, blah 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 blah. So I was thinking, what do you make of the idea that whenever we see these awards like the Oscars, for that this red carpet situation, is that red carpet actually representing a bloodline?
I had not looked at that in that sort of sense, but that certainly would make some sense in terms of how the occult would set things up, so that if that is an occult ceremony with occult meaning, then everything there would have an occult meaning to it. And so that would be like the blood coming off an altar, which would be the stand that they're speaking and presenting at, as the priest would, and that would represent the blood that was flowing down from the altar, and the sacrifice that they would have made, generally human sacrifice. And that just going with it, because I hadn't thought about that before. I think it's a great analogy, particularly when they're all doing occult arts and symbolization as they're doing the entertainment that goes along with the show. And you've got this Oscar image that is very, very strange looking, with, almost like an elongated type skull, and very odd looking feature that they're making as an award. And that you've got this stage of these celebrities of wannabe elite, but they have to pay homage in those ceremonies to their gods if they're going to have an occult ritual. So that's why you have to have all of those occult rituals and those signs that go with it. So I'll have to pay a little bit closer attention to the Oscars when it comes up, and see whether or not I see more things in there, because I think that's a very, very, very good point. That even though I know the Hollywood elite and the Hollywood actors and the writers and that whole organization is sponsored basically by the Rosicrucians as the entertainment arm, that they would be, heavily influenced, and would be, in everything they do, they want to show their allegiance, and they know that we're usually too stupid to recognize it. And in this case, I would classify myself in there, because I hadn't really looked at that whole ritual and ceremony. Say, okay, what's the occult things? I've noticed the things that they say and the things that they do, but not the ceremony. So yeah, I get blindsided and miss things in plain sight as well. So tip my hat to you in terms of pointing that out. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's I'm not an expert like you. Yeah, what I know is basically from reading your book and from talking to you. But when I looked at that, I thought that's the perfect symbol for a bloodline walking across that red carpet. So that's just my 2 cents. I might be completely wrong.
Yes. Yeah. And walking up the carpet, as they enter, I mean, you have a god sort of emblematic. It's in the city of angels. In Hollywood, that's the wood that the magicians would use to manufacture wands and magic wands with, and things like that. So, I mean, it's already got a number of things already baked into it. So why wouldn't they continue with that, right? So I think there's a lot to that. I'll have to pay some more attention to that.
In your research with these bloodline families, was there a particular bloodline, a particular family that stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many bloodline families that stand out as you sort of trace that coming through. But I think what we have to look at, what we're looking at today, is look at what stands out today. And I still think that, the Windsor line is a very important line, and that's that goes back to Germany with the Hanovers and co. Um, what's the other German aspect to it? It's co. I
Coburg,
can't.
Saxe Coburg.
Yeah, Coburg. That's it.
Mhm.
Yes, and they changed their name, to Windsor,
Mhm.
after and during World War One to sort of break off that sort of connection. And of course, even Prince Charles says he has, as part of his sort of Eastern bloodline, has bloodlines that go back to Vlad the Impaler, which is, a classic Scythian, Tuatha De Danann, red-haired, hazel-eyed, pale-skinned knight operative, educated at the School of Solomon in Vienna, blood-sucking Nephilim type of thing in, nobility. So all of that is they have an incredible ennobled genealogy that intermixed with the Norman bloodlines, through William the Conqueror and Rollo and all the way back to the Norse gods, and as well as with the Stuart dynasty, which was considered the most ennobled dynasty since the Merovingians, and all of them have married and scion their bloodlines into there. So I would put them very, very high up. I would say there's not much in Germany today that's visible to me, but that doesn't mean it's not possible. I would also look, though, at the Bourbon family and the Habsburg Lorraine families that are still very, very active, as well as the Stuarts, even though they're not very, very prominent. And but again, we don't know which one will sort of come out of that. And again, we don't get a lot of direction from the Bible, except for possibly in Daniel 8, where it's going to come, one might say would come out of the Greek Empire, but I mean, there was still 4 empires there that, it leaves it very, very open for speculation. So there's not anything that really ties it in. So it may not even be from Europe.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I think we need to be open to some of the other bloodlines. And if it is out of the Roman or Greek Empire, then, that would keep it, sort of Mediterranean based, but we still have a lot that we need to be aware of. And, a lot of those Middle Eastern bloodlines, they aren't all that active today. So, I mean, they're kind of obscure to us. So, but we do need to be careful. And the Sufis, are the mystical part of Islam. And the Aga Khan, they are very much interconnected with the secret societies and the bloodlines. And, the Aga Khan met with Justin Trudeau because they're family friends. And for people in Europe who may not understand, this is a transgenerational family relationship between the Trudeaus. And Pierre Trudeau married Margaret Sinclair of the Sinclair line that produced Freemasonry out of Scotland, that made the protection for the Templars, and of course are also part of the Rollo bloodline as it goes back into the Norse dynasty. So I would say we need to be understanding that the Sufis also sponsored the assassins within their organization, which gave the Templars their organizational structure to bring back to Europe. So we need to be careful there as to who he's going to be, but he has to have some sort of Judaic bloodline, because otherwise the Jewish people aren't going to accept him to, as possibly their Messiah, and to accept the ability to do the sacrifice on a wing of the temple. So he's going to have to deceive them at least for the first 3.5 years until he does the abomination.
Okay. So now, Netflix Messiah. So I watched it, and I noticed some very strong reactions from the Muslim community. And in short, Muslims also have an Antichrist figure. They call it Dajjal. And they are also awaiting the return of Isa. Isa would be Jesus. And Isa is the one in their belief system who is going to destroy the Dajjal, the Antichrist. So far, so good. If you only look at the broader strokes, it's pretty
Yeah.
close.
Yep.
And one thing that sparked yeah, let's say the little outrage was this character is called Al-Masi um, in that series. And they pointed out that Al-Masi is short for Al-Masi ad-Dajjal. So if we look at the details, then there are many, many differences. So, for instance, they think that he will appear in Iran and that 70,000 Jews will be among his first followers. How that is going to play out, I don't know, because I tried to check the actual inhabitants, Jewish inhabitants, and they are declining. I guess there are roughly 1,300 in Isfahan left. So after the Islamic Revolution, a lot of Jews left Iran. So I don't know how they are going to have 70,000. That number makes no sense to me, but
Yeah.
that's only me.
Yep.
And yeah, so what do you think? Where do you think he will come out of Isfahan?
My gut feeling is not.
Mhm.
I'm not. I mean, and again, you don't get any of this coming out of the Quran. It comes out of the various hadiths,
Hadith. Mhm.
and the hadiths are not a cross sect set of oral traditions. They are unique to each sect. So the Sufis have one, the Sunni have one, and the Shia have one, and so they're not congruent with each other because they have this internal power struggle, right? They both consider each of the other ones as illegitimate, so they're not going to be congruent. And so we want to be careful that these are oral traditions, but they have this tradition that may be rooted back to the Quran, that there's a Messiah coming, but they have taken on their own sort of flavor as they go down each of those sectarian branches of Muslims. And so the Mahdi, which is another name of the ones for the Shia, is, again, they expect him to come up out of Iran as well. So there is that part of that consistency in the same sort of version. But they don't look, they should look at Jesus as the Messiah because the Quran says he's Messiah and he's the Word of God and supports those things, but they reduce him to a prophet level.
Yeah,
So,
sorry, go ahead.
So they would say that the Messiah that would be coming, when I don't agree with this based on what the Quran says, but they would say that there's going to be one sort of evil figure within Muslim community that's an Antichrist type figure, and I agree he will be an Antichrist figure that will be defeated by a good Messiah type figure of the Muslims, and then convert the whole world to the Muslim religion.
Yeah.
And I don't agree with that. I mean, that there's nowhere in the Quran that you can get any of that. But within the Hadiths is a whole different story, and that's how they interpret the Quran. So that will be what they're expecting. So it will draw significant attention throughout, but expect a civil war to settle that out, right? And when I talked about these wars that are going to take place, if we think the Middle East is a mess today, we've seen nothing yet. So if you get two Messianic type figures from different sects, let's say between the Sunni and the Shia, they're going to have that war to settle that out because they can't cohabitate.
Yeah, what I found interesting in the series was that this character, he comes out of Iran. And so I have a feeling they made a composite of different types of religious traditions, and they smashed everything into that one character. So the CIA agent, for instance, she points out that his accent reveals that he is coming from Iran, and then later on it is revealed in the series that he is from Iran. So
Well, I would also say that whatever sort of comes out of that, I think it's the Iranian or the Shia version that will win out. And the
mhm,
reason why I say that is when we get very close to the midpoint of the last 7 years, and in that Gog war in Ezekiel 38, we get the alliance of nations, which includes Persia, but we
mhm,
don't get much of the Sunni nations. And I think it's Persia that is dominating that. Now you get countries like Libya
mhm,
and North Africa in there, but we don't get much for the Sunnis. So I think that is settled out before you get to that war just before the midpoint of the last 3.5 years. Um, but it also becomes part of this larger alliance, and most people think that this is going to be led by the Russians as part of the Gog alliance, but we don't know if that's totally true or not. But they could be a couple Antichrist figures that's kind of aligned as well in that war, right? So,
mhm,
and what we also know is that in the last 7 years, you will have 10 groups of nations that rise to the top.
mhm,
So when you have Persia there, I mean, that includes Iraq of today, and actually, depending on how far you want to extend that old Persian empire, as we talk about the relationship of empires of the old time, that could encompass the complete Sunni region today after they've defeated them.
mhm. Okay.
Um, it's a possibility, but what we do know, it's going to be at least the area of where Elam is in the Bible, where Iraq and Assyria is, and current Persia, and maybe a little bit into Afghanistan, at least as a minimum of what Persia is as we understand it for that alliance. And then you've got the northern nations of whatever empire the Russian leader is going to have there, and then you have possibly a Middle Europa empire that is going to be included in part of that, as well as part of that alliance, with a lot of, however, the African nations are split up. Whether or not it's just the northern or it's all of Africa, we'll have to wait and see. But certainly the northern African nations are part of that great alliance. So I think that might tip the hand in terms of what may be playing out in the Middle East in terms of some of these wars and Antichrist figures.
Mhm.
But it's going to be confusing.
Yeah, it definitely sounds as if it will be. So, but just as a clarification, the Hadith is a second set of law.
Well, they use it to override the Quran, is what they do.
Mhm,
And again, each are different. So each will try and shore up their claim to having the right interpretation and having the right uh, leadership, bloodline, and
mhm,
succession as it came down. So, what hadiths are people that were around Muhammad that they claim that he said. So they're oral traditions of what they claim, and that's why you can't trust either one of them or any of them, because they all have different versions of what they attribute to what um Muhammad said, as opposed to what was written down into the Quran. So you would think if it was that important what he would had written or had said, they would have had it included in the Quran. So anything that's done on an oral tradition, and these things aren't written down till hundreds and hundreds of years later, so we don't know how that's changed in that oral tradition over time or manipulated in terms of helping them to create their own sort of pedigree within the movement and within whoever is running the government at that time to, keep them in power. So we want to be very careful in terms of what, and I would advise this to Muslims because they're the ones who read the Hadiths. I would be very careful of overlaying a meaning onto the Quran as to what a Hadith says. And I would make it akin to what was going on with the Pharisees and the Sadducees in the time of Jesus, that they had an oral tradition as they were losing the common language as they were in exile in Babylon. And the language of Hebrew was being lost and only kept amongst the religious class and the royal class, that Aramaic became the common language.
Mm-hmm.
And so they created the Targum. And it was partially from scripture, but then it had all of the commentaries and oral traditions of the rabbis, whether it's the Sadducees or the Essenes or the Pharisees. And so those editorial comments and interpretations they vetoed what was written in the Bible. They were taken as law and doctrine. And that's why Jesus spoke against the Pharisees and went directly to the scriptures and used those in direct opposition of, and he was very hard on the Pharisees and the Sadducees for using the Targum and the oral traditions because it distorted the meaning. So in every category, oral traditions over the scripture, whether you're Muslim or Christian or whatever, you're down a path where it's interesting for context, but you want to be very careful with that.
Okay, so we have a description of the Dajjal, and it is said that one of his eyes will be like a floating grape. In other words, he cannot see with that eye. He will be blind. At least one eye will be blind. He will have crooked legs, and his hair he has a lot of hair and very, very curly. So that would be something that does not apply to the Messiah character in the Netflix series, because he is a very good-looking, attractive young gentleman. His hair is long, but it's wavy. It's not curly. He has no crooked legs. Nothing wrong with his eyes. So do we have a description of the Antichrist?
Well, we might have a description of a particular Antichrist figure, perhaps. And understand that when we understand the word jinn, that is the jinn of the Quran. Typically in the English spelling, that would be Jinn without the D, but it's the D and the J are, sort of, as you enunciate that coming out of the original Arabic languages, you would pronounce that as being that. And that's the root word for genie, so genie in a lamp. So and there's two classes of jinns in the Quran. One is the fallen angels, but fallen angels for sure. And these demon demigods. So the offspring of the fallen angels, even though it's not clearly outlined in the Quran as such, but they are a lower class than the jinn. So, and Iblis and or Satan, because he's called both, is considered a jinn. So we know it's an angelic being, and then we know you have these lower ones that are what is understood as this demon spirit, aka the genie in the lamp, right? So this Antichrist figure that is being described would be seemingly described almost as possessed, like a possession of a human being with some of those distorted features. But typically out of the other religions, as the Antichrist figure is depicted as their Messiah, as opposed to the false one, he would be an incarnation of one of the higher ups. So in that case, it would be a jinn in the Quran version, and you wouldn't have a distorted looking figure. Although it could be a very humble looking individual, just as Jesus was described as being, sort of not out of out of the ordinary, but rather ordinary in terms of how he looked. So that's the incarnation that like would be used in Lord Maitreya or the new Buddha, or how the Gnostics would view it. And that would be where you have an avatar and an avatara. And an avatara would be the angelic being, and the avatar would be the one that they are going to cohabitate with the host, as opposed to a possession, which is a not a symbiotic relationship. Biblically, we get an example of that with Judas having Satan enter into him to help him complete the task of betraying Jesus. And perhaps you also have Satan entering into the Nakash, or the serpent in Eden, to help him bring down Adam and Eve, because it's not Satan who loses his arm and legs and intelligence. So that's the Christ consciousness concept of the Gnostics and or the Eastern religions, where it would enhance the power of the Antichrist figure and work in a symbiotic relationship with Antichrist, as opposed to this deformed type of individual. And it would have great oratory skills, it would have great knowledge, would have great power, and on and on and on in terms of how it would enhance that ability. So typically that is what is being talked about in terms of what will happen with their false messiah. I would call it false, they would call it their messiah, that would create this individual that is going to lead people into godhood and into the next level of evolution spiritually.
Oh, okay. So you already touched a little bit on it, and I found it interesting that the Muslims say that the Dajjal will not be allowed to enter Mecca and Medina. And because of that, angels will prevent that he enters Mecca and Medina. So because of that, he goes to Jerusalem. In the series, we at least saw him, this Messiah figure. We saw him once in Jerusalem. So,
And again, that makes sense, because the Sunni who control Mecca, if they don't accept the Antichrist figure from the Shia, aren't going to let that individual into Mecca. But Jerusalem will be a city of the world that will recognize not only the Sunni and the Shia and the mosque, and have their own, just as you see the Palestinians being offered in the latest Mideast proposal by the Trump administration, is to have a capital in East Jerusalem. It will become a city of the world and the city of all of the religions. And so it would make sense that he would go to Jerusalem and not be permitted to go to Mecca or Medina.
So, but I guess Jerusalem in general plays an important role in this entire scenario.
Sure, it always does. And whether it always doesn't matter whether it's Islam or it's Christianity or it's Judaism, it is the center of the world, right? And very close to the center of where civilization began, both before and after the flood. So it's always going to be there. And Jerusalem is, the city of God, right? It is the city of David. It is in the covenant land, the land separated out of the earth for God. So everything is going to have that sort of central relationship, whether or not you are for the God of the Bible or you're for the fallen angels. I mean, they all want to have control and make claim to Jerusalem.
And the Antichrist will be crowned there, correct?
Yes, in the temple in Jerusalem. So what's the temple? Is that the Islamic mosque that's there? Or is that another temple that's built? Josephus makes a case that from the directions that he provides from the time of Jesus, that the temple, at least Herod's temple, wasn't where the Islamic mosque is today, but was off just a little bit more to the side and closer to the ridge of the valley. And that could mean help understand what is going on with Daniel's prophecy, where the sacrifice will begin at the start of the last 7 years that the Jewish people are permitted to perform on a wing or an extremity of the temple,
Mm.
because it'll be built off to the side. But no, there's no doubt that it doesn't say wing or extremity when he is crowned and declares himself as Messiah and as God in the temple, on the temple site. Now, it may be renovated with the universal religion that permits all of this as one, umbrella religion, allowing a lot of different sects in it that permits both the sacrifice and for Antichrist to crown himself there. But certainly the Jewish people will say, hey, that's clear from the book of Daniel that this is the time we need to flee because we're about to be wiped from the face of the earth.
Mhm. What you just said, he will declare himself God. The Muslims think that his claims will get bolder and bolder. And then at one point he will say that he is God.
Yes.
And is there a gradual development with the
Yes.
Antichrist as well? Yeah.
There is, and there's 3.5 years on that ascendancy. So, and you also have a false resurrection that needs to take place. And we
Mhm.
understand from Revelations that he'll receive in Revelation 13 a mortal head wound. And I think that's when Antichrist is going to have Azazel, Abaddon, Apollyon, enter into him in this as and use Antichrist as his avatar. So Azazel being the avatara, and that this is the God that Antichrist will honor as
Mhm.
the God of forces, just as the God of forces, and I think we covered this off in another show, comes from the Hebrew word mauz, which is rooted in as and azaz, and is linguistically and etymologically connected to ez, which is where scapegoat or Azazel comes out of, right? So you put el on forces or fortresses that he honors, and you get the god Azazel, and he was the destroyer of the antediluvian world, the one who taught war and making of weapons to the people. And he's the one that is the leader of the host of the angels, as Enoch talks about him, and sent to the abyss. So that's why I think and just making a quick short story on it that connects him back to being the king of the abyss. Now, the Antichrist in the King James Version is called the son of perdition. And perdition goes back to the Greek word Apollyon,
Mhm.
which is the title, Abaddon, which is destroyer, as in Jeremiah 51, and Apollyon is destroyer, as it comes out of Greek. And Antichrist is the one who destroys Babylon in Revelation 17, just after the midpoint of the last 7 years, sets himself up as being God to be worshipped. And Abaddon is, as I talked about, as destroyer. This is when Babylon in Jeremiah 51 is also destroyed by the destroyer, who is Antichrist. And Antichrist, as the son of perdition, is the one who comes up out of the abyss, who now is not, but once was, but will be again. And I think this is all sort of creating that sort of effect where he combines with Azazel to give him his power. So he negotiates this covenant. He starts to become known on the world scene. You've got all of this havoc going on. You've got other Antichrist figures, false prophets. You've got Babylon in full power right now. And he becomes the rising star of this universal religion until he goes rogue and destroys that universal religion. At just after the 3.5 year point. So he does have a level of rising and a power level that rises, so that, as Daniel will talk about, at the midpoint of the last 7 years, he will actually bring down some of the starry host, some of the angels of heaven. And if we equate that with what's going on in Revelation 12, you have a third of the angels being thrown down to the earth after the war in heaven, which is also in that same time frame. It's got, in same verse, you've got the people of Judea fleeing Satan and Antichrist, because this is the time of the abomination. So all of that comes together at one period of time. But what I'm saying is somehow he receives more and more power to the point where he can actually make war in heaven, supported by Satan and Azazel, and actually bring down some of the starry host, or the angels that are fighting with God and Michael.
Mhm. So who is going to crown the Antichrist? I mean, who has the authority? Who is going to?
Babylon will. Babylon does. And, it is this religion that has two horns
Mhm,
like a lamb and
mhm,
speaks like a dragon. And they set up this abomination in the temple, and this thing that controls people to the point of it. If they don't worship the Antichrist and or Satan and or take the mark of the beast, it's going to cause them to die.
mhm,
So it is full front and center here, and is now going to help shed the universal religion, and Babylon is going to be destroyed, because Antichrist has become so powerful, has declared himself to be God. It doesn't need the empire of the past, or the religion of the past empires, including the last end time empire. But we know Antichrist doesn't kill the false prophet at that point in time. It actually sheds that universal religion and goes along with presenting Antichrist, just as Elijah does for Jesus. Again, creating that credibility and plausible. Here's the false Elijah. Here's the false Antichrist, and we know that the false prophet is still around at the time of Armageddon, when the true Messiah comes, because at that time Antichrist and the false prophet are thrown into the lake of fire.
mhm.
So when you ask who's going to crown them, it's going to be that universal religion, and then they dump that old religion so they can replace it with the God of the or the religion of the Antichrist, as Daniel talks about.
Mhm. So would you say that the Vatican will play a central role in this? Because in the
I think so.
series, it is that the only statement that the Vatican gives is, we are investigating him if he is fit to be declared a saint. And
Well, I think they will investigate all the false prophets and all of the Antichrists around the world. They'll have their own. But again, there's going to be, probably some competing factions here, which makes it interesting. But Babylon, I believe, is the city of Rome. We know Babylon is a city, as it's called a city in Revelation and in Jeremiah. And we know it is a religion, because we have it speaking as a lamb. So it's a Christian veneered religion, but it talks like a dragon. So it's going to be polytheist. So something is going to take over this universal religion. We know it sits on 6 hills or 6 mountains, which the Vatican already does. And Catholicism is as you define that, is a universal religion by definition. We know that at least the Europeans want to create it as the new Babylon, as you have in the charter by Master Roncelin for the New Templars, or for the Templars, to create the new Babylon through the Catholic Church, in which is the Jesuits are the new Templars, and it's their agenda to do that. And also understand we have a Jesuit Pope today. And you have this religion that is going to have its own set of prophets that will bring in all of the other religions around the world. So you have to see further doctrinal degradation out of Catholicism as it moves towards polytheism. You have to have, like, the Mary apparition and the Medjugorje apparition, with the prophets coming out with prophets of doom, that if you don't convert to the one true religion, you're going to be destroyed. So whether or not it's Rome or it's somewhere else, but I lean on the side of Rome. And you have in both Revelation and in Peter, where Babylon is talked about, when you take that back to Greek, it is not only the empire of Babylon and not only the Babylon city of the ancient empire, but it is also used as an allegory for Rome. Just
Mhm.
as it was Pesher with the Essenes for Rome, and just as Peter talked about, in the letters, about writing from Babylon or the city of Rome. And so I think all directions lead to Rome as being that church that's going to be infected. but it will be dominant with its false prophets and its prophecies of doom to bring back all of the polytheist religions under the original pantheon. It will declare Jesus not being the true Messiah, because they're going to want to present their own Messiah. It is going to declare that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all went rogue, and that religion goes back to Moses as sort of a historical nexus point. Moses and Abraham, they'll all have focus on, and that Moses brought the religion of Heliopolis, which is the religion of the Essenes that they believe in, with him. And at the point of the monarchy, King David, King Saul, they went rogue with a monotheist religion, changed it to create a pedigree and a mythos for the royal dynasties of Judea. But the true religion is the religion of Egypt that the Israelites originally brought with them via Moses, and that they will restore them back to the original religion, the Egyptian religion, which is the religion of Babel, because it is the second component after Babylon, or the city of Babel and the Tower of Babel. Nimrod stays in Chaldea, or Sumer, Shinar, and Mizraim, along with Hermes, according to the Gnostics, goes over to Egypt to start the second pillar of that religion, and that's the antediluvian religion. So I think, for me, everything points to Rome as the city, as the religion, and as the place that's going to control all commerce. So it's going to have a business aspect, and will also take a tribute on every electronic transaction that happens in the world, and grows extraordinarily wealthy, which is why those 10 kings are going to gang up and unite with Antichrist in a conspiracy to bring down that Roman Empire, or the Roman religion, because of the wealth that it is growing from controlling all of the transactions in the world. So it comes first, and then comes Antichrist.
Okay. So what do you make of the idea that the Knights Templar had actually two arms, two lineages of religion? The so-called unwashed masses got Catholicism, and the initiated ones got Luciferianism. What would you?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the organizational structure that they brought back with them from the assassins, from the Sufis, right? So they were polytheist at the core, and the outside they present an offshoot of Islam. And so the Knights Templar, which were all originally Masons and sons of kings, whether or not it's, name a few of them, you've got Anjou, you have de Payan and de Bouillon, and they take their bloodlines back to the Merovingians. The last survivor is Dagobert. You have as a battle partner of Hugh de Payan, Henry de St. Clair, who descends from the Rollo bloodlines, and it's the Sinclair transliteration of that name that follows. And there's 2 Cistercian monks there as well, but understand that the monks are all part of the nobility bloodlines as well. So it was a royal bloodline order of Gnostics at the core. And then out the outside, it was a false Catholic presentation, but all of the adepts were mystical polytheist adepts, and that's why they would spit on the cross, and that's why Baphomet would have been an image that they would have worshipped, and it was a goat god, right? An Azazel type of god, whether or not it was Azazel or one of the order of degraded angels. So absolutely, it was that at the core, and that's why the term that they wanted to create as the new Babylon within the Catholic Church is such an important play, because they wanted world government with their Babylon religion as that universal religion. So when the Knights Templar were wiped out, they had to replace that within the church, and that's why the Jesuits were known as the New Templars, because they were organized to do the same thing and to eat away at the Catholic Church and then take it over at some point in time, so that they could bring on their universal religion, but under a guise of a Christian veneer that will be, polytheist throughout, except that various sects will be able to worship in sort of a local vernacular kind of way.
Mm. We also have these three letters, IHS. What do you
Yes.
make of the idea that it actually stands for Isis Horus Set?
I think there's a lot to that.
Mhm.
It's quite common in their allegorical, literal literature to have something that makes sense on the surface. So in this
Mhm.
case, the name makes sense for the three Latin words um, about the crucifixion,
Mhm.
but the allegory underneath is the true meaning for the mystical sects. So you have to be an adept to understand it. So that whole imagery and everything about the Jesuits, if you look underneath the superficial fairy tale narrative or aspect, you've got the symbology you need to look to. So I think it probably means both. One is for public
Mhm.
consumption, the other one is for what they truly believe.
Yeah. And since we are at it with official narrative and the other meanings, um, what do you make of the idea that the word Vatican actually comes from this Etruscan goddess Vadica, the goddess of the underworld?
Well, there's no doubt that a lot of polytheism entered into Christianity right from the beginning in terms of when it became homogenized as the state religion.
Mm.
So not only do we have Mithricism that's homogenized into Christianity to make it palatable for all of the Roman citizens under Constantine, but you also have that as an opening for Gnostics to mole into Christianity. So they did that through the Roman collegia to build the temples. That's where a lot of the Manichaeans and Mithricism followers went into. But you also had the rise of these monastic orders, whether or not it's the Cistercians, the Augustines, you name all the different ones. They're all a monastic order. Well, they get that from the Essenes, who were the religion of Egypt. The Essenes were the first monastic order of the West that came from how they organized things with the Buddhist monks and things in the East. And the Essenes, as part of the Judaic bloodlines after the diaspora in 70 AD by the Romans to Jerusalem and the Jewish people, they came to Europe. And so they brought that monastic order, but as polytheists and as Jewish people, they needed to, on the surface, appear as Christians and have a place to hide. So they hid within the church and have been affecting that in terms of its doctrine, its words and things and imagery that has been implanted in it ever since. So you'll have all sorts of things in there. So the short answer is I think most things that have come out of the Catholic mythos, that's just come down through history in terms of its iconology and idolatry, will have a polytheist meaning underneath.
Mm. That reminds me a little bit of Sabbatai Sebi and how he declared himself to be a Messiah, and then he converted, and then you have this appearance of so-called crypto Jews, and that's also a very, very convoluted story.
Yeah, there are so many examples of things like the Celtic Christian Church
Mm.
when that was evangelized into Christianity, except that they were Celtic Christianity underneath the game, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it's a common organizational structure for protection and secrecy to have that veneer and to hide in plain sight. And the best place to hide is right under their nose, and the best way to influence is through being part of them. So that you have Saint Bernard, who is the one who vouches for the Templars, argues for them, writes a letter for them, um, is the patriarch of the Knights Templar, is the one who gives them the Red Cross, which is the order of Constantine, of the princes of Jerusalem, the bloodlines out of Jerusalem that have fled out of Europe, as created as an order by Constantine at that time, also had the Red Cross. And the Red Cross goes back to the order of Ormus in Alexandria as well. And I won't go too deep into the minutiae of it, but Saint Bernard was a Benedictine Cistercian monk who was a Gnostic. And he was the second most powerful individual at that time. And he's the one who sponsors the Knights Templar. So they've been hiding in plain sight as moles within Christianity and creating importance within Christianity and eroding it all throughout its history.
Mm.
And we have that in Protestantism as well. There's lots of Gnostic moles in Christianity. And if you see Christian churches that have Masonic or unusual iconology decorating the church, that's usually one of the signs.
Mm. Yeah. So, so far in this series, the Messiah character hasn't made any outrageous claims. He is, sometimes he seems to be very likable, and then at other times he's really odd. So, yeah. It's at this point, I mean, it's just the first season that has been released. It's very hard.
So I think it's, from what I'm hearing, and I haven't seen any of it, but what you're telling me on it, it's very well sculpted to prepare people.
Yeah.
So if you're going to deny that Jesus is the true Christ and he's coming back this time for war, and that he actually died on the cross is what they're going to claim, and everything else that goes along with that, then how they want to present who the false Messiah is going to be is actually, because Jesus wasn't Messiah, this is the first coming, right? And so he's going to come in meek as Jesus did, and then rise to power, and there won't be this second coming. It'll just be, he's just there, but it'll be a second coming that's condensed because he'll fake the resurrection, the Antichrist will. So they're going to condense that down in a very, very short period of time. But he's got to start off as being not that outrageous, not that super powerful, very, very sort of humble, and then it starts to change.
Mm. So, in the Muslim tradition, they say that the appearance of the Dajjal will coincide with hunger, with war, with all sorts of hardships, and that is one of the reasons why people will fall for him. And I guess that is, it might be even financial collapse, whatever. And I guess that is pretty similar. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's very, very similar. And, Jesus lays it out quite well, is that in the first 3.5 years, there'll be all sorts of antichrists, all sorts of false prophets. And in the fig tree generation, which begins before, and if you overlay the birth pangs, that this gets more and more intense and quicken as the pains come, then this starts before the last 3.5 years, where you've got false prophets and antichrist type figures and some wars leading up, and there's going to be this intensity that continues to go. But he also says, but after that, it's even worse, which is the last 3.5 years. If you can actually believe it, because there's going to be genocide like you wouldn't believe. There's going to be disasters like you wouldn't believe. And you're going to have competing different views, including a monotheist from God perspective, that you will have the 144,000 out there preaching. You will also have the two witnesses. And the two witnesses who will be killed by Antichrist at the 3.5 year point as he's coming to power, or right after, the people will celebrate the deaths of the two witnesses like it was Christmas. Mm-hmm. Because the prophecies that those two bring will predict catastrophes like the other false prophets, but the ones that they bring will be very, very problematic and do much damage to the people who those disasters are happening to, and they will celebrate Antichrist murdering the two witnesses. So you're going to have competing prophets out there.
Yeah.
And some of the prophets out there will seem like true prophets, but they'll be probably contrived catastrophes that they bring about, as opposed to ones that you can't explain.
Yeah.
So again, it will be confusing.
Yeah. You know what? I was just thinking, I know these people who plan this, that have their Antichrist ready in every generation, and several of them, blah, 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 blah. I know they are not stupid. Yeah, you can say a lot about them, but stupid isn't one of them. So,
yeah.
But at the same time, if you believe that, and if you, I mean, how in the world, if you believe there is a God and you want to, yeah, be in competition with that, and you even go as far as having Antichrist ready to go at any given moment. Gary, that sounds so delusional to me.
It is. It is. It's so crazy that that's why a lot of people just, want to refuse to accept that they've been plotting it for this long, and it's that well organized, and it is transgenerationally committed to pull this thing off. That it's just like, you just want to take a step back and say, I don't want to deal with that, because that's just crazy. But yet, when you honestly look at what's going on in the world today, you see this continual march to that and a fulfillment of that. And it's hard to dispute what's going on with what is told is going to be going on. And, let me throw this one into, this would be hard for a lot of Christians to believe, but in the Catholic tradition, in terms of what they think Antichrist and Babylon are going to do, is that they're going to eliminate communion, and they're going to replace it with blood sacrifices, because Jesus will be because Jesus will be dismissed as the Messiah. So that means that if he's not the one who atoned for all of the sins, then you have to go back to the atonement sacrifices as they're written about in the book of Leviticus. And of course that will make sense to the Islam and to the Jewish people, which is why you have the sacrifice going on in Jerusalem as well. And it will be different kinds of perhaps sacrifices, of blood sacrifices, in every kind of sect around the world, but that will be what will be replaced. So even within the Catholic tradition, they have those seemingly unbelievable things that they say are going to happen, but we need to be prepared that those things are going to happen. And there will be remnants all around the world, Christian and I think otherwise, that will say, no, we're going to say no to the New World Order. We're going to say no to the Babylon religion, but we're going to be persecuted. And that's why you have persecution that happens in the first 3.5 years, and also the second persecution in the last 3.5 years for the people who refuse the mark or refuse to worship Antichrist and the beast, and two separate genocides.
So in the series, the character seems to resurrect at least 3 people. And Muslims say that the Dajjal will at least resurrect one. It will appear as if he resurrected one, but their take on it is that a jinn will take the form of the parent.
Yes.
Yeah. So do we have any accounts of false resurrections or?
Well, you have the Saint Germain mythos in Europe.
Yeah.
So, but I think you have to again sort of get your head around everything that Jesus was predicted in the Bible to do and did has to be counterfeited for the pedigree
Hmm.
of the Antichrist. So just as Jesus raised Lazarus, which is a true resurrection, and again, we don't know whether or not he's the one that Jesus loved and wasn't going to die and will be around at the end time or not, or it was, another disciple. So, and for people who want to read about that, that comes right at the last chapter of the book of John in terms of, the disciple saying, "Well, are you saying he's never going to die?" He says, "No. What is it to you if I want him to remain until I come again?" Right?
Mm.
So, but you do have, as I say, Jesus with the resurrection of Lazarus. So this Antichrist figure, he is going to have to reproduce that. He's going to have to bring at least one person back from the dead, and I believe that would be um, done with the help of the demons, which is the lower level jinn, and will possess uh, that individual and fake it, because everything's got to be counterfeited.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, yeah, in this series, he sometimes is sitting. He is at one point he is in a detention center, and he doesn't move for hours. He's just sitting there, and there they throw in a little bit of yeah, I would say Buddhism. He's not sitting in a full lotus position, but you can see that the hand gesture. Yeah.
Yep.
If you're yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So again, I go back to what you were talking about earlier on in the show, that the figure that they're going to create, even though it may have a lot of things based in Islam, it would be a cosmology of the larger Antichrist figure. So beliefs being mixed in from all around the world. And again, this figure needs to be able to reach out to other religions if it's going to be the one that brings it all under one religion or under its own religion. So, but it's that Christ consciousness aspect that they're talking about, or the incarnation. And so that originates, for the most part, as we get it from post-Diluvian religions out of the Hindu religion, which again would be the same root religion if you take it right back. But that's a strong tradition out of there. So it would have to have that Lord Maitreya sort of overlay if they're trying to do that cosmology, or the new Buddha. And for people who don't understand, is that Vishnu is the god that was an incarnation for Buddha, is what they believe. And Vishnu is one of their more important gods. And Shiva, which is the destroyer god, is the one who incarnated into Narasimha. And Narasimha is a lion type of god, and Shiva is the destroyer god, very similar to Azazel, and why it's got so many connections to the CERN project and things like that. And if you look at what the Gnostics did as incarnation in terms of literature, they created, C.S. Lewis did in his Narnia tales, this incarnation of a Christ-like character named Aslan, who
Mm.
is a lion character that's based on Narasimha out of the Eastern religion, just as Shiva, the destroyer god, Azazel, the destroyer god, as I mentioned earlier, I think is going to use Antichrist as his avatar, and is the avatara that gives Antichrist the power. So that Christ consciousness entering in has to be sort of connected, and that's that connection, as you say. They're showing that Buddhist relationship back for the people who it's meant to show what they're doing,
Mm.
even though they're using the superficial fairy tale narrative as Islamic. They're actually coding the message to all the mystics around the world as to what they're talking about.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, one of the first scenes where he appears, he's in Syria, and he is talking to a huge crowd of people. And then a, a storm prevents ISIS, the terror organization, from entering Damascus, because this storm is there for 39 days or something like that. So anyhow, and somebody in the crowd says something along the lines of, no, you are Shaitan. And then he says, no, 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 I have looked into the eyes of Shaitan, and I will tell you, I'm going to shatter everything you know about God. And another thing, when he got out of the detention center and the judge set him free to go, during that court procedure, he said, I walk with all people. So that would fit into what you just said, that he has to be a composite figure of...
Yes, all religions, all people. Yeah. And at the adept level of the Western mystical organizations, and Freemasonry would be that first third degree York Rite or 33rd degree Scottish Rite, they're said to have learned who the God is that they worship, and what they learn will overturn every preconceived idea you had before. Mm-hmm. So that's looking into the eye of Osiris, into the eye of Horus, the all-seeing eye, through the great architect of the universe, as they're told is their true God that they worship, and that the God of the Bible is the evil God, and that they're equal, and that when they're talking about looking into the eye of Satan, that's the eye, the all-seeing eye that they're talking about. And that is the concept that at the adept level, that all the mystical adepts understand is that it overturns everything you thought before. So they couldn't have laid it out more accurately in terms of the storyline that would also transcend out of Islam. Just as the Sufis would say, well, of course that makes sense, because we know we're part of that global polytheist religion.
Yeah, they seem to serve everybody.
Yes.
So, Muslim scholars say that, first of all, not all Muslims will survive that entire period just because they are Muslims. So they are very clear on that. Yet they say that it is easier for Christians to fall for the Dajjal / Antichrist, because they think that it is possible to see God here in this realm. And Muslims say it is not possible to see God here in this world, but Christians believed that it is possible to see God in this world. Not only that, can you see him, you can also kill him. Because, and I guess they are referring to the Trinity, which never made sense to me, but that's a different story. So what would you think?
Well, the Bible doesn't teach that God is coming back at Armageddon.
Exactly.
It says Jesus, the Word who came from God and went back to him, just as the Quran talks about as well, was crucified and went back to heaven, is coming back. It doesn't say God's coming back. Now, after the millennium, and when a new heavens and a new earth and everything is recreated, that's a whole different story, right? But the Bible doesn't say that God can be killed. And it even says with Jesus, when he was crucified, that, they said that they killed him, but you can't kill him. Yeah. He was resurrected and went back to him. You can't kill the Word of God. It's just, so everything is congruent in that aspect of it. So I don't think that Christians will be deceived because of that.
Mm-hmm.
but Christians will be deceived en masse nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
So I certainly agree directionally that Christians will be deceived, because bringing out alleged evidence that Jesus didn't die on the cross is going to kill the faith of a lot of people, because if they believe that, I mean, just as Paul said, Christianity is based on that one principle that Jesus didn't die. He was actually resurrected back to heaven. So if they say he survived from the cross and had Josephus as the third son, then that, kills everything that Christianity is built on. And we know they're going to deny that. We also know that the delusions, according to what Jesus said, are going to happen, and the lies are going to be so powerful it will deceive the elect if that were possible, and it clearly says they are deceived. So Christians en masse are going to be deceived, but for a variety of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And Christianity is going to be shattered. It's going to be absolutely in crumbles, and what's left of the remnant church will be persecuted unlike anything we've ever seen in the first 3.5 years of the last 7 years. So yes, Christians will be deceived en masse, but then so will the Muslims. So will the Hindus. So will the Gnostics. I mean, everybody will be deceived.
Yeah.
So yes, that part I agree with. How? That's very subjective.
Yeah. I lost my thought. I'm having senior moments.
Oh, I know that feeling. I hate it. I hate it when that happens.
So, but here's one. We have this New Age religion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Could you imagine that, let's say, the Pope, the Vatican, at one point they will push more into that direction and make it more popular?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they will. I mean, it will all be folded into that umbrella religion. And New Age is just the modern form that came about, with the alien phenomena, starting with in about, right after World War II, and Rosalind in particular. You get this New Age movement, but that is just the extension of Theosophy. So it's just a more modern version of Theosophy. And Theosophy was created by the Gnostics and the Rosicrucians and the secret societies to be the end time religion that was designed to be a bridge between religion and science for the end time. This is the religion and organizations that sponsor the Jesuits, whose job is to implement that religion in the Catholic Church. You see the Catholic Church today in working very feverishly under Pope Francis to work with the World Council of Churches to water down all the doctrines to unite all of the Christian churches. You also see him crossing over into talking to all of the polytheist religions of the world, whether or not it's Buddhism, or the Gnostics, or Sufism, or Islam, not as a polytheist, but as they believe it, as a monotheist religion, to bring those back all together. Now, that's a tough job to do, but New Age is also part of that. So it's going to take some false prophets with contrived catastrophes to bring these, to sort of pull it over the top, to rebuild things. And it needs to destroy Christianity right at the heart to make that happen in the West.
Mm-hmm. So the reason why I asked that is because let's say one section of the New Agers is this alien thing. Yeah. The
Yep.
aliens will whisk us away. They're going to rescue us. So, and here is at the very beginning when the episode starts, the word Messiah, the A, can you see it? The A
Yes.
is written
Yep.
like this.
Yep.
Like a triangle. Yeah. And it's close down here, and then here.
Yep.
There seems to be something like a rising sun that,
Hmm.
or maybe it's a planet, I don't know. To me, it looked like a sun. And when I saw that, the way they wrote the A and with the sun in it, I thought I would not be surprised if at one point they give the entire thing an alien twist.
Sure, they will. And that symbol there has so many connections to the alien mythos and or the mystical occult religions. So whether or not that is a pyramid, that is some sort of um, generating machine or spaceship as they're depicted in some shows, or that's a planet, Nibiru, or the 13th planet. You have also as a crossover with that as being sort of a pyramid, which is important to the occult religions in terms of creating megaliths for in honor of their gods to worship. You have that could be a sun disk or the sun, which is part of the sun worshiping religion. It could also be the all-seeing eye that they're making a representative of inside the pyramid, and all of that is connected back to Satan and the creation of pyramids, and as a shining sort of object, because it's believed the pyramids had this sort of glass, not glass, but shiny stone on the outside originally that shone in the sun. And it was in honor of the rebellion of Satan in about 4000 BC, is sort of how that mythos goes. And so that imagery there is depicting more of an Antichrist type figure as an A, and an alien mythos that will come together. And if you look in all of the literature that is preparing people for it, any of the shows that have aliens in it, they tend to have a Eastern religion doctrine that is part of it. And Star Wars would be the best example, or Babylon 5, or Star Trek. They all have that Eastern mystical religion aspect of it. And of course, the world all coming together as one is also part of that. And that is also part of the alien mythos, where they're going to help us prevent ourselves from destroying ourselves from the face of the earth. They're going to present us all of this new knowledge, and they're going to help us rebel against the evil forces of the universe, just as the mystical religions at the adept level say that Satan is the equal of God, and you're in this perpetual dualistic fight between good and evil, except that you've been misled that Satan is actually the good angel who wants to free humankind.
Mm.
And the evil God of the universe is the God of the Bible, just as in Doctor Strange it's represented, and Earth is that only realm that's going to be protected from this evil God as long as you fight for it. And they're going to ask us to fight for our freedoms in the end time, to fight against this evil God of the universe. So, looking into the eyes of Satan and turning over every preconceived notion is all part of their doctrine of the alien mythos that they're coming back to help us do. And so, back to the Star Wars analogy, the evil empire are the angels and the forces and the priests and the followers of God, and the Jedi, which is rooted in the word jinn, and jinn from the Quran, is this bloodline of priest warriors that are, have the power of the Force. And then, of course, you've got the evil force, which is, again, in this perpetual ongoing battle. And, of course, they're the good guys. And that's what they're going to tell us through the alien mythos. And they're going to help us fight through technology that they provide and knowledge, and ramp us up to make it plausible that we could actually win our own realm or defeat the God of the universe, even though the angels know that that's impossible. But what they teach foolish humans is that it is possible.
Mm. Yeah, we also have Jesus replaced with an alien. That's also a line of thought that is pretty popular.
Mm-hmm.
And and I also found it interesting that because I didn't know, so I Googled it a little bit, what Muslims think about aliens. And there was one scholar who said, yeah, we don't rule it out because the Quran says that Allah is creating perpetually. So there is no, so to us, it's, there might be other worlds that
There
are,
might be, yep.
yeah.
There might be, or there could be survivors of first incursions, second incursions, that there was a greater creation that went on than just the giants, that there was little people and all sorts of other beings that are, would be used to disguise, or it's just a deception. We don't know, but we have to be open to the fact that they're going to use that in whatever way to lead people away from God and to degrade God, no matter how it comes out. That's the common denominator to stay focused on.
Mm. So, would you say this TV series, Messiah, is very timely?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I think we're going to see more like that, just as,
Mm.
you've got the new Pope series and things like that.
Oh, yeah, I'm watching that. Mm.
Yeah, and with this one, I saw a couple of shows on that because it's on HBO. I do have that. It's kind of a boring series, but it was interesting that on the pick of the new Pope that they ended up going with royal bloodlines, which is, again, it's the black nobility, as they're called in the Catholic Church, of the royal bloodlines that, actually go back for the most part to the Italian or the Roman bloodlines, back through Julius Caesar and Augustus, and back to the families of the Senate, and then back to the gods of Rome and the Etruscan gods, as they come out of history. So, and that the current one, that I saw in the last show, he's not sure that, even though he's from English royal bloodlines, that he wants to be the Pope. But then they bluff him and say that there's going to be a Norman Pope that is of nobility, and that changes
Yeah.
his mind instantly, which again shows you that rivalry that's always going on the bloodlines. But again, it's just part of their belief system that they're setting out there for us, and that they're going to bring that out in some sort of realistic way as we get closer to the end time.
Yeah, but now Lenny is out of the coma.
Oh, is he? I haven't seen that.
You haven't seen, yeah.
And I
Lenny is
didn't,
out of the
and
coma, and he
yeah.
reappears in Rome. And
Okay. So
the,
now they have a true Antichrist type or anti-Pope type figure, where you have a replacement Pope and an original Pope. So they'll have a dilemma there for sure. And I didn't see the first series of the shows or the first season of
the
the
young
Pope. I
Pope,
just thought,
yeah, I saw that
yeah.
as well. Mm.
So I thought, well, I'll watch a little bit of this and see whether I want to continue to move to watch it. But again, I think that you're going to see something like that, and they're getting us ready for this fight, for this takeover of the church, and that may be part of the pedigree of the false prophet being placed there, because again, we know Elijah is taken to heaven.
Mm.
So the false prophet has to have some sort of pedigree that will come back from heaven somehow to make the way, but in a compressed form, just as Antichrist will have that compressed form, to falsify his credentials as the Messiah. It will have to have a similar compressed schedule. So it may be like that as an allegory, where he's presumed to be dead or whatever and then comes back. So we need to be prepared for that as well.
Mm. And so we have ancient Babylon, yeah,
Yes.
and we know that a lot of, yeah, let's say, traditions that sneak their way into all sorts of religions, they have their roots in ancient Babylon.
Yes.
So I was just thinking, because that is such an important nexus point, why why is the modern Babylon going to be destroyed?
Because it's part of the deal that Antichrist makes with the 10 kings.
Oh, okay.
right? That they're going to hand their power over because they're so jealous of the harlot religion because it's growing so rich and is so powerful that they want him to become king of the world and to destroy Babylon and free them. And under this new deal, they won't have to pay all of these taxes or electronic transfer uh, payments to Babylon, and they'll be in total control because it's the universal religion that makes it possible for those 10 kings to come to power as the world government. And so they're subservient to it, just as Babylon rides these empires as it's described in Revelation 17, just as it rode all of the empires past. It's the same religion. But it makes it possible for this covenant to be signed and the world split into this new world order where you've got 10 regions and everyone is led by a particular individual, probably mostly of bloodlines, or some people think actual Nephilim, seeing as how there's 10 toes and 2 feet and 2 legs. What we do know is Daniel 2:43, it does say that these kings will mix their seed with humans. So they're either descendants with pure bloodlines that are going to be mixing their seed with humans, or it's recreated Nephilim that are mixing their seed with humans. Who knows? Maybe some of them are aliens. We don't know how that's going to come out. My conclusion is that it's likely descendants of the Nephilim. But I'm open to the other possibilities. And there may be some very low-level bloodlines, let's say like Putin or these strongmen around the world, right, that will have control, but won't be sort of these ennobled bloodlines, because it will be an empire that is like iron and clay that doesn't mix. And there's 2 different sets of 5. So again, we'll have to see how that comes to fruition, because again, sometimes prophecy can be not what people think it means. And so we can deduce a lot, but we still have to be very, very careful.
So once that is destroyed, will they substitute it somehow? Let's say a new Vatican, maybe not called Vatican.
Jerusalem will be the city.
Okay.
It'll be the Sodom and Gomorrah, as Revelation talks about and other passages in the Bible. And as in Daniel talks about, and again, that's where Antichrist is crowned too, right? And everything's going to, even the Armageddon war is going to be centered around Jerusalem. So it's the center for the end time. And as Daniel talks about, he will replace all the gods and religions, even the ones that women want to worship, whatever that means. So we're going to see probably some sort of mother goddess or a Mary apparition that's going to get this cult-like following in the end time, which I think is a key component, and replace all of that, even to the chagrin of women, with himself as God. So he'll be worshipped. It'll be a new religion that in the old is gone, totally replaced. And I think that's in Jerusalem.
Who knows? Maybe Azazel will be Pope, the new Pope. I'm just kidding. Wow, that was very interesting. Thank you so much, Gary, for coming.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and hopefully we took an example of what they're preparing us for, and without making it too confusing, to get people to understand sort of the directional aspect of what they're preparing us for, and an understanding of their tactics and their allegories in terms of how they intertwine that throughout all of our culture around the world, whether it's media, education, or in entertainment, or in literature, so that they're always preparing us to accept what's going to come, but in a way that we may not expect.
Yeah, it's never a dull moment.
Never a dull moment.
Yeah, so guys, that was it. The Messiah series is most certainly a composite of all kinds of religions, some more obvious, At one point, he's walking on water. That would be, yeah, a reference to Jesus, of course, and then a lot of Islamic tradition going on there. But I'm pretty sure we are in for a good ride, and I can't wait for season 2. So this was it, Night Flight for today, with the wonderful Gary Wayne. And stay safe and sound. Until next time. Bye bye.